Jurassic World Dominion's Giganotosaurus is renowned as one of the strongest theropods to have walked across our screens. Designed to be the apex of apexes, the Giga was pushed as the dominant predator of Biosyn Valley. It acted as a brutal reminder that even Rexy could be outmatched. With its giant size and terrifying force, this megatheropod quickly cemented itself as a fan favourite in the franchise. But what if we toss this Hollywood version of Giganotosaurus into the past? More specifically, what if we dropped it into the late Cretaceous of South America? Could Hollywood's horror hold its own in a world full of native animals, or would fiction fall short against reality? G'day everybody, I'm your host, answering the question, could Dominion's Giganotosaurus survive in the Cretaceous? As always, we have our regular scoring system of environmental survivability, dietary suitability, and resistance to threats and competition. These will each be scored out of 10 before being added up for an ultimate survival score. And if you enjoy this type of content, make sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel so I don't end up extinct like the animals in this video. Well, this Giganotosaurus was reimagined by the Jurassic franchise to serve as the villain of the movie. It has been given other names within the fandom such as Zeb or Joker, but I'll be sticking to calling it the Giga or Dominion Giga. Also, I am 90% sure that it is a bloke, but hey, correct me if I'm wrong. While based on the real Giganotosaurus, this version is heavily dramatized for the film. I mean, when we look at them side by side, it is clear that Dominion's version is very reptilian in its form, and in terms of size, it truly is a monster. It stands about 5.5 meters or 18 feet tall and stretches roughly 15.5 meters or 49 feet long. It weighs in at an estimated 9 to 15 tons, and yeah, that's quite a difference I know, but it depends on what statement that you want to take. However, even with its lighter estimates, it still places it heavier than the average real-world Giga. His physical might is truly his outstanding trait. He managed to body Rexy in combat. That's right, the same Rexy who in a porous state was able to hold her own against the Indominus Rex and Tarbosaurus. He was able to sustain bites from Rexy, Therizinosaur slashes, electrocution, and even had the inside of his mouth lit on fire. That to me is the embodiment of strength, endurance, and durability. And you might think that with his size and reptilian build that he would be a slow mover, but thinking that would be wrong. He's fast, clocking in at around 48 kilometers an hour, 30 miles per hour, which would put him neck and neck with Rexy. When talking about weaponry, the Dominion Giga comes loaded. While he might not have the bone-crushing teeth of a T-Rex, his jaws are still devastating, powered by muscles and supported by jagged teeth that would allow it to peer the height of other dinosaurs. When it comes to smarts, the Giga is no Patrick Star. He often targets weak points like legs and the neck, and even goes out of his way to try to remove weaponry from the fight. For example, when he bit off the Therizinosaur's claw. And one thing I really have to commend the movie for is when facing against other dinosaurs, he truly acts like a wild animal. Multiple times when defeating Rexy, he lets her live rather than taking her out. And he even showed indecision when facing two threats at once, which he ultimately paid the price for. But in saying all this, the Giga is not without its flaws. His senses appear to be a bit lackluster. I mean, in the Dominion prologue, the Giga did not even realize a T-Rex was right in front of him until they were practically bumping into each other. On paper, that is not a great look for an apex predator that has to survive in a diverse ecosystem. So with Dominion's Giga now being established, let us release it into late Cretaceous South America, home turf of his real counterpart. Does he thrive in this extinct land, or will he fail? Well, we of course have to start off with environmental survivability. During the Cretaceous, the Cordilleras Formation of northern Patagonia was a warm, semi-arid world that was shaped by weather extremes. Vast sandy plains were present and were broken by dunes and wide shifting river channels. The temperatures here were not too cold or overly warm, likely sitting at around 16 degrees Celsius or 60 degrees Fahrenheit. Here there would have been periods of dryness which were accompanied by strong winds that would pierce the open territory. Despite this, life as always finds a way, and they often found their way within the swampy wetlands and seasonal floodplains that would form around water sources. In an environment like this, I think that the Dominion-style Giganotosaurus would be able to adapt relatively well. Its size and resilience would allow it to handle the temperature and various terrain types. I would give the Dominion Giga an environmental survivability score of 8 out of 10. I mean, come on, movie dinosaurs tend to be pretty hardy across numerous environments, so it's going to be chilling here. But when moving on, we of course have dietary suitability. And well, this ecosystem was supported by a range of herbivorous species which varied in size, which created multiple tiers for prey items. Among some of the larger options, there were titanosaurs like Ankylosaurus, which reached roughly 15 to 18 meters or 49 to 59 feet in length and had an estimated range of around 7 to 15 tons. There were of course slightly smaller sauropods like the Rebeccasaurus, such as Lammaeosaurus, which was around 12 to 15 meters or 39 to 49 feet long and rated at around 7 tons. Alongside Lammaeosaurus, there was also Rheasosaurus, which was smaller in build but still substantial animals, likely reaching several tons in weight. These middle tiers would feel much more of a manageable size range for the Giganotosaurus to take down compared to Ankylosaurus. Although the least likely sauropod to be taken down is the indeterminate Titanosaur. This dinosaur is of course poorly known compared to the others, but it has been hypothesized to have grown to around the size of Patagotitan, which if you don't know has an estimated weight of around 60 tons. If that interpretation for the Titanosaur still holds, then it would make it the largest sauropod of this ecosystem. That is correct, I said largest. Argentinosaurus did not actually overlap with Giganotosaurus. While that might be surprising, it works in the favor of the Dominion Giga as it allows it to avoid having to contend with the largest terrestrial animal to ever exist. Smaller sized prey did exist in the form of ornithopods, focally an iguanodontid type animal. Of course though, the juvenile sauropods would also fit in this smaller niche. These younger sauropods would be high reward prey without the extreme risk that was posed by the fully grown adults. Against the largest animals like Ankylosaurus, it would likely have to learn to utilize persistence over brute force. It would have to target the sauropod's flanks, limbs, and even neck if accessible. It would need to make repeated deep bites and then withdraw without getting crushed by a counterattack. This would allow it to gradually weaken the animal through blood loss and exhaustion. Smaller dinosaurs like Limaeosaurus or the ornithopods in the area could be taken more directly, using speed over short distances to close the gap before delivering a decisive attack. In this sort of environment, the water sources would be where the herds would concentrate around. The Giga's success would highly depend on its endurance, timing, as well as selecting the right individual. This could be a weakened giant, a separated subadult, or even the smaller and faster herbivores. Here, I would give the Dominion Giga a dietary suitability score of 8 out of 10. It just has such a variety of sauropod options to choose from, all of which vary in size from smaller than itself all the way up to the size of a building. Think about it, if this ecosystem can feed the whole native Giganotosaurus species, then I think the Dominion version would fit right at home. Moving on to threats and competition, we of course know that this ecosystem was pretty much dominated by a single megatheropod. However, there was still a supportive range of smaller carnivores, some of which could act as a source of competition. Kicking us off, we of course have our low-level carnivores such as Buyutaraptor. To be more than honest, they would probably not even pop onto the Giga's radar. They only weighed in at a couple of kilograms at most, so no, they wouldn't even be worth the effort to be considered a snack. Moving on, we get a bit larger with Bicentenaria. This was still a relatively small theropod reaching around 2.5 meters or 8 feet long and under 50 kilograms or 110 pounds in weight. These theropods would not directly challenge the Jurassic World's Giga, instead acting as an opportunistic scavenger of smaller prey options. If given the opportunity, they would quickly strip the carcass of a sauropod. But those are all small fry and don't really matter when it comes to true competition. However, things start to ramp up here. We of course have the annoying to pronounce Ekrixinatosaurus, an abelosaurid which reached around 8 meters or 26 feet in length and 1.2 tons in weight. These abelosaurids occupied a middle ground predatory niche, being larger than the previously mentioned theropods but still smaller than the area's apex. Abelosaurids are quite distinct when it comes to their build, being obviously shorter with a boxier skull. This predator likely would have focused on ambushing the smaller sauropods and ornithopods that existed in this ecosystem. I think it's pretty obvious here that even the second largest theropod of this ecosystem posed less of a threat and more so just a source of competition. If they were ever to have any sort of conflict, then a bite or two from Dominion's Giga would be all that it would take. Then, as I'm sure all of you have been waiting for, the greatest threat arrives on the scene. This apex predator was of course the accurate version of our contestant, Giganotosaurus carolini. At 12.2 meters or 40 feet in length, 3.5 meters or 11.5 feet tall at the hips, and 8.2 tons in weight, Giganotosaurus was no joke. It was of course after all one of the largest theropods to have walked our planet, often being put in second place behind Tyrannosaurus rex, although that is a bit contested. This theropod of course possessed quite a mean bite, being estimated in a 2021 study to reach 25,000 newtons. Sure, it may have not been at the level of Tyrannosaurus rex, but they were still powerful enough to cause some serious damage. Its bite allowed this megatheropod to puncture skin, fat, and even damage the bones of other dinosaurs. Also, unlike the T-Rex, its teeth were far better suited for inflicting deep slashing wounds. This would of course help for bleeding out sauropods. It has also been hypothesized that this theropod was fairly mobile in terms of movement speed. Although as far as agility is concerned, it was still lacking a bit behind some of the other theropods like T-Rex. The native Giganotosaurus would have also been experienced when it comes to interspecific conflict. This is because they would have competed with each other over territory, reproduction, and food. However, as we see with many other fossils of other theropods, it is unlikely that they would have always fought until the end. For our Dominion Giga, this means that its survival was not solely based on being able to take down prey, but also being ready to defend its territory and food from other rivals. Although it is durable, taking too many bites in a short period of time could lead to fatal blood loss or even infection. I would give the Dominion Giga a resistance to threats and competition score of 8 out of 10. It would act as the dominant presence, but with its accurate self roaming the same lands, it would not have an unchallenged rule. But now I've said practically all that I had to, we are now onto the ultimate survival scenario. So as we get started, refuel your drinks, get your chips, and subscribe to the channel, and now it is time for the final part. So if the Giganotosaurus from Jurassic World Dominion were to be placed into South America during the Cretaceous period, survival would depend on its self-control and pure strength. This ecosystem has a varied environment with many dry spots in the surrounding area. Meanwhile, the river systems would bring about vegetation and overall life. Its sheer size and unique look does provide the Giga its advantages, but it also means that there's an increased demand on its body. Every hunt has to justify the energy being spent. The first priority for this giant would be to establish territory, one that provides everything a megatheropod could want. This of course being water, food, and shade. Water in particular is important as everything concentrates around there. Herds of ankylosaurs and lemmayosaurs would travel across these routes. This would create predictable patterns that the Giga would be able to take advantage of. However, predictable prey option does not necessarily equate to an easy meal. Depending on the surrounding terrain, cover may be very little, and in this case, timing and positioning would matter more above all else. Its feeding strategies would have to remain selective. A fully grown Ankylosaurus reaching over 18 meters and well over 10 tons would still be a risky target despite its great size. Another important thing that would have to be kept in mind is that for the Dominion Giga, we don't really know the full extent of its diet or hunting strategy. All we have seen him eat is a deer and take down a Parasaurolophus, but based on the narrative as well as the details we have from other sources such as Jurassic World Evolution, it is safe to say that it would still be confident in taking down sauropods under the right conditions. This would particularly include sauropods that would be succumbing to injury, isolation, or environmental stress. More consistent prey would come from the mid-sized herbivores such as Lemmayosaurus and Rheososaurus. In addition, I believe that the ornithopods in this area may act as a key prey option considering it is one of the few animals that we see the Giga take down. They are large enough to sustain a predator of its size, but not so large that a single mistake would become fatal. However, its hunting strategy would likely transform over the months, going from the heavy all-in attacks to one strike then separating. A bite onto the rear flank or limbs followed by retreating would allow exhaustion to do the heavy lifting. Patience and sheer force mixed together. Although a key question is, would it go ahead and try to take down the unknown titanosaur that roamed this region? And if I'm being honest, I think I'd have to say it's very unlikely. The Dominion Giga seems to be a lot more conservative in what prey it decides to take on. Plus, if it went on to take on a Patagonian-sized sauropod, there is a good chance it would get crushed under the weight of the attacks. So unless it is very desperate and on the verge of starving, it would likely ignore these larger prey options. But with every successful hunt, this creates a tension. Ekrixinatosaurus would not approach directly as it lacked the size to truly contest with an adult Giga. However, what they can do is take advantage of the larger carcasses left behind. If the Dominion Giga specifically spotted the giant Abelosaurid, then it would likely chase it away or engage in a fight as it would simply be too large to ignore. But those are just small potatoes. Instead, the greatest threat remains in its own kind. The native Giganotosaurus represents the only source of competition that it would have to worry about. Encounters between these two, like with wild animals, would be avoided when possible, but territory overlap, challenges over a carcass, or access to water can force conflict. I very much doubt these sort of battles would be prolonged, instead being rather brief and violent exchanges where risk would outweigh the reward. As previously stated, minor injuries can carry long-term issues. Infection, reduced mobility, or even energy loss can lead to the Dominion Giga going down in this environment. The Dominion Giga would likely just force the native Giga to back down and leave the territory. Younger native Gigas, however, face a very different reality. They lack the size of the adults, but hey, they still need to eat, so when encroaching onto the Dominion Giga's territory, it could very well end up being a doomsday for them. As always, seasonal change would reshape a lot of things. During periods of dryness, the water would shrink and the prey thus would concentrate around water-bound areas. This would increase hunting opportunities but also intensify competition between other Gigas. During wetter periods, herds would be able to spread out and that would force forced the Dominion Giga to track further and further. Even with the constraints that are linked to this ecosystem, the Dominion Giganotosaurus would be the dominant predator in this area. It would not just take down prey for fun like the Indominus Rex, but rather to feed. It would not engage every rival for no reason, but rather to protect its territory. It would choose carefully, conserve its energy, and do its best to remain uninjured. With all that being said, the Dominion Giganotosaurus earns an ultimate survivability score of 24 out of 30, which, yeah, in my opinion, should not be too surprising. It is a solid score. Really, the only two ways I see this theropod going down is if it bites more off than it can chew when taking on a titanosaur, or if it succumbs to its injuries from protecting its territory over the years. And with that, we have reached the end of the video, and I hope you've all enjoyed. If you did enjoy, make sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel, and as always, I'll catch you on the next video. See you, mates.